Chris Colt was the best wrestler that nobody ever saw. He helped bring music into modern wrestling. He was so revolutionary when it came to his work, his look. He had his finger on the very pulse of how he knew he could gain attention for good, bad, or indifferent. And he was also 100,000% batshit fucking insane, and his life really ended a lot sooner than it should have. But that's the way that he wanted it. For better or worse, Chris Colt will definitely be remembered, even if his best work happened, and a lot of people are scratching their head thinking, who? But what an impact he left on those he interacted with. I'm John Renton with my review of Dark Side of the Ring. Welcome to my nightmare, the Chris Colt story. Let me know your thoughts on this show in the comments, please. I was excited about this particular episode because outside of stories that Jim Cornette has told on his podcast, drive-through experience, whatever. Yes, I listened to the drive-through and experience. Oh, well, sue me. I mean, you can't because it's a podcast. It's entertaining. And really, he does tell a lot of great stories. And outside of reading a couple articles, I really didn't know that much about Chris Colt. And I'm not necessarily saying I know that much about him after watching this. I definitely know more. And I didn't realize he was born in the Pacific Northwest. Born in Idaho, lived in Oregon, died in Seattle. And oh boy, the stories I could tell about Seattle. That being said, Chris Colt. What an episode this was. Next week is Chris Adams. Oh boy, oh boy. I can have thoughts about that guy. That being said, Chris Colt definitely was conflicted. He probably had a lot of, maybe not necessarily self-loathing, but a lot of shit he carried with him as a man that liked men more than women, and parlayed that into a second part of his life, bringing wrestling and porn together. And what an episode! What an up and down, all around, come on defense work episode this was. So, the Memphis and territorial footage, including footage from a small territory in Arizona that I always forget exists until, some guest the program on the experience or drive-through, and that's mentioned. But, whew, God, this was something else. Some great talking heads here, by the way. Not same as it ever was, same as it ever was. Was Chris Colt once in a lifetime? Yeah, to an extent he was. Bad childhood, bullying, being bashed for liking boys. I also want to say before I get further into the review that if you have a problem with anybody in the LGBTQ community, fuck off. Get the fuck out of here. Get the fuck out of here. Pull your head out of your goddamn ass. Like you're the Human Centipede trilogy. What the fuck? Nothing wrong with people being with consenting adults, living as they are, as long as nobody's getting hurt. Let's let people love who they love. That's what it comes down to. And LGBTQ people are people too at the end of the day. And if you don't think that, you're a fucking asshole. But Jim Cornette, Bill Anderson, that's me. Ty, who was the great nephew. I don't mean he probably is a great nephew, but he was the great nephew as far as bloodline goes. Rhonda, help me Rhonda, you're the niece. And then Princess Victoria and Moondog Madetti, as well as a few other people. It was nice to hear Cornette on this because he was a fan of his and, had probably provided quite a bit of that footage because he was an obsessive collector of so much footage. He did everything in excess. Not Cornette, Chris Colt. Cornette did get a lot of heat and used tennis rackets in excess, but never mind. So in Phoenix, Arizona, there was a cage match, and Chris Colt took a bunch of LSD and thought giant spiders were coming to attack him. Like Kingdom of the Spiders, Rift Tracks. I don't know what's going on here. Spiders are attacking. What is the mystery? What's going on? Deep cut for Rift Tracks fans. Mind-numbingly confusing to everybody else. He started punching fans. Bill Anderson, in his rookie year, has a chair, and he's holding himself. He's terrified. What the hell is actually going on here? And, cops were macing people. Chris was taken to jail. The amount of, drugs that he did, he really probably should have been legally dead several times. He lived the rock and roll lifestyle. He hung out with Janis Joplin. A little bit more on that story in a bit. He was a roadie for Joe Cocker. Look up Joe Cocker's music. You might be surprised by that. And he actually had 100 pages of, just handwritten notes detailing various stories and various journeys through life. And I would like to see that parlayed into a movie. Because I think you could actually tell a pretty good story there. Not the Dark Side of the Ring. Evan and Jason didn't do a really good job there, but I'm just saying I would like to see this actually in a full-fledged movie. He ends up seeing a woman drinking wine, is talking to her and everything, and then finds out a little bit later that's Janis Joplin. He's like, why didn't you tell me who you were? She didn't want somebody just to be a beggar or hanger on because she was famous. She really just needs somebody to talk to. He's like, I will always be your friend. I wish I would have dived a little bit more into that. I'm not saying this should have been a two-parter, but this is where I think 90 minutes actually could work for Darkseid. It's not like Vice is showing necessarily revolutionary programming outside of this. So, he wanted to be the Janis Joplin of wrestling, aka die by the age of 27. Well, he nearly doubled that. Nearly doubled that. Janis Joplin, by the way, you want to talk about somebody that marched to the beat of her own drum and was insane, but was a very talented singer. There are people that compare Amy Winehouse to Janis Joplin. I will take Janis Joplin's music over Amy Winehouse, but nevertheless. He was known as Charles Fay Harris, born in Idaho in 1946. I don't know what part of Idaho. You want to talk about a place that gun nuts would absolutely love, Idaho. Oh boy. And then he went to Drain, Oregon. Look that up on the map, folks. If you're not that familiar with Oregon, it's an hour 15 from the California-Oregon border. And yeah, he had a bad home life. I mean, a good home life except when the grandparents drank, and boy did they drink. They drank a lot. A lot. I mean, it was the parents, but the grandparents, you get the whole point. A lot of drinking going on with the adults going on here, and grandparents were drinking so goddamn much, they would get a half gallon of whiskey, there were beatings, it was cruel. Don't beat your children, what the fuck? Your children, your grandchildren, what the fuck's going on with you? Rhonda called him Uncle Chuck. Grandpa hit the mom. They recount the story of Chris getting her in the vehicle just to protect. Grandpa's shooting at them. It's absolutely insane. They end up taking off. They settle in another town. They go to a town called Roseburg, Oregon. That's really close to the California border. That's south of Drain. 35 miles. I had to look this up. I've been to a couple of those towns, but it's been a while. Like, a long time. Like, there were a few road trips I've taken in my life, and why the fuck? I went to Drain, Oregon, I have no idea. Oh, right, I had a girlfriend at the time that wanted to do some traveling. So, yeah, we did that. And then stayed over in a hotel, like, at one point, because that was when you could actually take time off from work, and you could actually drive around and not have to worry about people with banjos when they hit you over the head. Kabong! Yeah, not a lot in Drain, but that's kind of cool that Chris Colt, homesteaded there for a bit. He bleached his hair, he was getting on the wrestling team, he bleached his hair because, back in the 60s, boys didn't bleach their hair unless you were Harley Race. And who's going to tell Harley Race to not bleach his hair? Who's going to tell Harley Race no? Even if you tell him no, let's check out my review of that if you want to know what I'm talking about. But anyway, he was kicked off the team, he was bullied for being gay, he went to, he was leaning towards men more. So, even though I'm sure he found women attractive in a certain way, obviously he leaned more towards liking guys, which is fine. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that at all. But he basically prostituted himself on the street after seeing a boy doing that to earn money and get his start in wrestling. He took the name Chris Colt from a thing called Colt magazine, which I had heard of, actually. I got a few gay relatives in my extended family, shall we say. I don't want to say immediate family, but extended family. It branches off like this. Ritlins and Hoofnagels, yes, the actual names that came together. I don't want to say our roots necessarily run deep, but we have more people than you would think. So, Tom Burke actually was pretty good as far as, talking head here. He was a wrestling historian. I've heard of him. I believe Brian Last and Jim Cornette talked about him. It had to be tough to make it in wrestling, especially if you were a gay guy. He was paranoid and self-destructive. And I'm not saying that there weren't wrestlers bullying him for being gay, whether he hit it or not. I'm not saying that. But Chris also had some issues, and that could have been just from his upbringing. It could have just been from the fact that he was just nuts. So, small territory in Arizona. He teamed up with a guy named Ron Dupree, who was 8 to 10 years his senior, something like that. And this is in 74, 75. So he would have been about 28, 29 at this point. Not Ron. Ron was approaching 40 at that point if we're figuring out the ages. They were good friends. They were gay. So what? Doesn't fucking matter. They were the California Hells Angels. I believe that was the second incarnation of the Hells Angels, if I remember right, because I think the other one got shot in the leg. That was around Minnesota. I think it was around the Midwest or something like that. I love the old Arizona footage, even though they only really had that much. It didn't look like there was fuck all of anybody in that studio, mind you. Looked like it was taking place in, like, with a backdrop of, like, a Western thing. But that being said, this was really cool to see that stuff. I don't know anything about the Arizona Territory. It's just nice to see it. Then he burned the U.S. flag to get attention, and the show got pulled. That probably explains why I haven't heard that much about that Arizona Territory. And Ron, unfortunately, suffered a heart attack that basically ended his wrestling career. But they stayed together. Okay, that's cool. Bill was brought in as his younger brother. And then Mike Boyette is mentioned. That's another name that Jim Cornette has talked about. And, yeah, they were going to be a team. I believe Bill was going to be the younger brother. He's going to be the manager. And then they were going to do like a Ron, Terry and Jimmy Garvin thing. Hopefully not a Terry Garvin thing in real life, if you know what I mean. But it was going to be three brothers to an extent. It was going to be like three guys. Well, then Chris starts freaking out and starts punching the fuck out of both of them. Mike Boyette was apparently a Vietnam War veteran and a judo, a trained judo guy. Judo expert of some variety. Puts Chris in a front face lock and chokes him out. Just knocks him out, basically. And then comes up with the idea, hey, we're going to run this guy over because I'm sick of this guy. And Bill's like, we can't do this. Bumps the arm enough so they avoid running him over. He says, fuck it, let's leave him. Bill's like, I could have gone to jail. It's probably good I didn't do that. Bill Anderson was really good in this. Really good. I've never heard the name Bill Anderson. They showed like a little bit of him doing, I believe, some kind of job work, enhancement talent work in WWF, which I can't say I necessarily heard the name, but he was really good here. And it seems like he's doing all right. Then basically him and Bill go to Seattle. Chris and Bill go to Seattle. Bill then sees how Chris is acting, drinking on the job, and says, "You know what? I'm done. I'm done. I can't do this. I can't be around Chris." Chris would burn out friendships on the road really quickly because he was so self-destructive and weird. He was revolutionary as far as his look and everything and his work. And you see, he's doing elbows off the top. He's doing, leg drops. He's doing some great stuff, taking some great bumps. He took like this one great arm drag. That, he was really good, and it was like, there were certain bits of the footage where it's like, you could obviously tell it from different time periods, but throughout his life, he could still take great bumps. Ron Dupree, unfortunately, did suffer another heart attack doing announcing in Seattle. Now, I don't know why they confused Seattle with Tacoma, because they said, they showed Tacoma in a reenactment and everything. I'm going to tell you as a Washingtonian, Seattle and Tacoma are different. Now, there's only about 30 miles and about 3 hours separating both cities. And trust me, Washingtonians, Western Washingtonians will absolutely know what the fuck I'm talking about. It could take you from South Seattle, and I'm talking like exit 163, 62, around there. And you go to exit like 135, 133, depending on what part of Tacoma you want to go to and hopefully not get shot. You could end up, taking every bit of that. You could try to take back roads and still not get there anytime soon because this fucking state has some really bad traffic. But nevertheless, not Seattle, they were in Tacoma, and Ron was doing ring announcing and died. Had another heart attack and died. And that's a shame. That's a real shame. They said this was in 75, though, so okay. He had the cage match in 75 in Arizona, then had the heart attack, and then a little bit later had another one? Okay, that's a bit weird. I mean, was it 75? Was it 76? Did they mix up the years? Nevertheless, he didn't quite get over that. Chris really didn't get over that. It scarred him for life. That was somebody he was really, for. Like he really loved him, and obviously, Ron loved him, and it was a shame, real shame to lose somebody you're close to. So then he calls himself the Chris Colt Experience, has Alice Cooper's Welcome to My Nightmare. Listen to that song, and it gives you more insight on Chris Colt. Brought music to modern wrestling before the Freebirds and before a lot of people. Now, yes, Gorgeous George did actually had Pomp and Circumstance well before Randy Savage did. And there were others that had music and it made it stand out, but Welcome to My Nightmare, that kind of stuff. Before license fees and rights fees and all that stuff, and you had to license this music, before that you could do whatever the fuck you wanted. So, Moondog Moretti talks about Chris's behavior. Apparently he was banned on TV in England. Yet they allowed Big Daddy to go out there looking at that fucking shitbag. The demonic gimmick. You can see where Kevin Sullivan got the idea from. I'm not saying he ripped it off from Chris Colt, but you can see it. Look at Chris Colt as, the face makeup and all that. And then look at like Kevin Sullivan in Florida in 85, 6, 7? Somewhere around there. Might have been 85, but especially after Eddie Grant passed away, because they're like, well, let's grasp at straws. But you could see the Chris Colt influence there. And he changed his appearance a lot. He would be cut, then sometimes he would look like he hadn't been out in the sun for a while, as Cornette talked about. And then Chris Von Colt, he was in Alabama in 87. He decided to be a Nazi for no reason except attention. Then he got into meth, and then his last appearances were apparently in Portland in 1987. If you want to get meth, Portland probably isn't the worst place. I mean, it is, because it's Portland. I'm sorry, I've been to Portland. There are great people in Portland. It's fucking Portland. It basically is the Tacoma of Oregon, or at least the Seattle of Oregon. Some cool places, and there's a reason why they say keep Portland weird, because if it was a normal city, you'd have to eliminate half the population. Same with Seattle. Not advocating for it, just saying there are a lot of fucked up people there. I love the Pacific Northwest, but god damn it, we have some weird-ass people here. He kept writing, by the way. He would then ingratiate himself into dope houses, pretend to be a cop, and steal drugs. That's how he kept going. And then he dropped out of the limelight in wrestling. People didn't know what the fuck was going on. He got into adult films. Everyone was shocked. Family members and others, and nobody had really seen them. They show footage, at least the footage they could get away with showing. Jack Frischer, who's a PhD. He's a director and a social activist, according to Darkside. He wrote for Drummer magazine, which they showed as much of the covers as they could. There was a cover that looked like Freddie Mercury giving it to Freddie Mercury at one point. He's written 20 books and done over 150 videos, and he even played a guy in a mask that Chris Colt was wrestling. I don't know what the fuck. Palm Dime video? Yeah, Brian De Palma video. Probably not that. Yeah. It was Chris Colt basically getting his life, aggression, and everything out because he was no longer wrestling, because he kind of torpedoed that, taking all the bumps, and talked about Hulk Hogan. There's a line from Chris Colt that he got a belt, that he would take Hulk Hogan's belt and whip him or whatever, and then Jack mentions how Hulk Hogan was a god among the gay community. No, AJ, you don't have to mention the gay community. That line's going to haunt AJ Styles forever. And then the AIDS epidemic, and yeah. I hate how AIDS is known as a gay disease. I mean, even now you see like ads where they talk about living with HIV. And then you see gay couples, and like, people can get that shit. Not just from sex. Whatever. There's always going to be that stigma about it. But Chris had it. Jack said that he made sure that his sets were clean and sterile. Evidently not. I mean, I'm not saying they got it from there, but oh boy. Chris wanted to basically get back, maybe get back into teaching, coaching, in wrestling or porn. I don't know. And then he died in Seattle, either in a back alley or with a needle in his arm in a chair. They're not sure. He died on May 25th, 1995. 95 was a rough year for deaths in wrestling. You had Chris Colt, you had Eddie Gilbert. I'm sure you had other people, but those are two that stick out in my mind. Eddie was another self-destructive one, but nevertheless, he died of AIDS. Bill visits his grave. Looked like he was about to keel over with every step. I'm sorry, but I just couldn't help but see it. What's his legacy? He was revolutionary. Chris Colt. I don't know what Bill Anderson. That's me. If you get that MST3K reference, I love you guys. But Chris Colt's legacy, he was revolutionary as far as the style and everything and what he was able to do in the ring, but he was ultimately self-destructive. I'm not saying he was a great guy. I'm not saying he was. I mean, I don't know if he was a terrible human being, but he was somebody that his family loved and his friends loved, but he ultimately could not stay in one place because he couldn't get out of his own way, and he was just so determined to live life his way, do it his way, and then he died, not even the next day. It is not ironic, don't you think? So yeah, Chris Colt passed away. Next week, Chris Adams. So let me know your thoughts on this episode in the comments. Like, share, subscribe, Twitter handle in the description. I'm John Rickland. I'll see you soon.